Good evening. We're cognizant that a few days ago was one of the greatest peacetime disasters in the land of Israel. We're well aware that as we speak, many families are mourning, are sitting shiva, are burying beloved ones, grandfathers, fathers, sons, husbands. The pain is unbearable, and the whole event is so unfathomable. How can we possibly understand that at the height of rejoicing in Meron, at the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, there should take place such a terrible catastrophe, a disaster which has affected and will affect so many in such a painful manner. It's really shaken up the Jewish world. And although the whole event is so unfathomable, I think it would be callous or even cruel if each one of us did not for a moment turn introspective and ask ourselves, how is this event going to change my life? How am I going to be a better person after Meron? Some have compared what happened to a cardiac arrest. The streets of Meron were small. They became constricted. And because of that constriction, the entire Jewish world suffered a heart attack. It goes without saying, our enemies are full of glee. And even within, there are those that point the finger at certain groups of people. Yes, of course, there needs to be a full inquiry as to what happened. How physically could such a disaster take place? Was it waiting to happen? Could it have been avoided? I'm sure much ink and paper will be used in analyzing the physical situation. But that comes later. Now it's an ace livkos. It's a time to cry, and it's a time to comfort. It's a time to pray, and it's a time to be there in the need of those who are mourning. But nevertheless, every individual, and certainly after hearing about the tremendous gravity of that event myself, I felt that I myself had to learn something, had to change, had to come out with some light out of the huge darkness. By Hasidim, there is something called Krishma Sha'alamita, saying the Shema before we go to bed. All Jews say Shema before they go to bed, but by Chassidim it was a moment of deep cheshbon hanefesh, of soul account, of thinking, what have I achieved during the day? What did I excel at? What did I not excel at? How can tomorrow be better than today? And they say by Chassidim, a Chassidische Verbringen, a Chassidic gathering, is when the mashpia, the mentor, says a Krishma Sha'alamita out aloud. He makes that soul account, but just audibly, so that others can hear what he's saying. And I too feel this is a moment that I would like to share a personal reflection. And I'm only sharing it publicly in the hope that it will inspire others. I want to make a disclaimer. I don't want anybody to misconstrue that I'm saying why this happened or laying blame on any group or individual. I think that there are certain things that we must apply those words of the prophet Isaiah, Kiloi machshavosei, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways, says God. There are certain things which, hands down, we just have to say we do not understand. And yet, I feel very strongly inside that I've got to come out with some decision, some way in which I personally can improve. The days that we're in at the moment, the days of the Sfiras HaOmer, were historically sad days. We're told that the sage Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students, and they died in a plague during this time period, and it was on the day of Lag BaOmer that they actually stopped dying. And this is one of the reasons that we rejoice on Lag BaOmer. In addition, it is the Simcha, the Hilula of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the day that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai revealed the deepest secrets of Pnimius HaTorah, of the inner dimension of the Torah. And those two come together on that day, the day that the students stopped dying, and the day that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai revealed the secrets of the Torah. I've been in Meron 3 times in my lifetime. It's undescribable. The energy, the unity, which of course all brings out with huge sadness and bereavement, the calamity and the disaster that took place this Lag BaOmer. Why did the students of Rabbi Akiva pass away? Our sages tell us it was because Shalei Nohagu Kavod Zeh Lozeh. They didn't respect each other. There are many interpretations of this. What does it mean? And just because one doesn't show enough respect to the other, that should bring a plague and they should die. The Rebbe has a very beautiful exposition on it. He says that the question is even magnified by noting that these were students of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the one that taught that ve'ohavta l'reacha kamecha, love your fellow as yourself, is a great principle of the Torah. How is it possible that specifically the students of Rabbi Akiva, who should have excelled in his principal teaching of loving another as oneself, how was it that they didn't give enough respect one to the other? And so the Rebbe explains that actually it was because they were students of Rabbi Akiva, because they wanted, so to speak, to defend what they interpreted as the opinion of their Rebbe, of their teacher, that itself led them to some lack of respect for each other. You know, we live today in a fractious Jewish world. It's a complicated Jewish world. It's a result of 2,000 years of Golus, expulsions, pogroms, refugee status, and ultimately the graveyard of Jewish history, the Holocaust. And it gave rise to a people of all shades. Just to name a few, you've got the ultra-Orthodox, you've got the Orthodox, the modern Orthodox, the traditional, and then you have conservative, reform, and liberal Jews, with so many denominations within each grouping. Within the Orthodox, you've got the Hasidic world, the Litvish world, the Yakers, the Sfardim. And within each group, within the Hasidim, you've got Belz and Bobov and Geir and Satmar and Sadigor. The list just goes on. There are those that broadly adhere to Halacha, to Shulchan Aruch, those that don't adhere to Shulchan Aruch, and the vast majority that, because they didn't have a Jewish education, are quite ignorant of what is written in Shulchan Aruch. The classic Tinoik Shenishba, the child abducted at an early age, the vast majority of Jews today who didn't have a Jewish thorough education past bar and bat mitzvah. And so what comes out is a huge array of Jews, noticeably different in dress, ranging from black yarmulkes, white yarmulkes, no yarmulkes, tattoos, and the list goes on. It gets even more complex when we discuss core issues like who is a Jew, conversion, passages of life, and then it gets infinitely more complex when we delve into politics, right wing, left wing, a mere following of what's going on in Israel and its political scene in the last few years, and currently only gives us a short window of insight into how complex the political scene can be. The concepts of Shleimus Ha'am, the complete people, Shleimus Ha'aretz, the complete land of Israel, Shleimus HaTorah, Torah in its both esoteric and exoteric dimensions. You know, a young person growing up today wants to belong somewhere to a grouping, and yet it's actually very complex to decipher all the various groupings and to understand one another. And then amidst all of that, there's a national heart attack. In wartime, a Yom Kippur war. In peacetime, a Meron. That's the moment that national soul is touched. And precisely at this moment, I become introspective. I ask myself, who am I? I'm actually a shliach of the Rebbe, a Chabad shliach who runs a Chabad house in South London, in a place called Wimbledon, which is famous, of course, for its tennis. I balance two very different worlds. On the one hand, I'm an Orthodox Jew, totally committed to halacha, to Jewish law, as portrayed in the Shulchan Aruch and the Code of Jewish Law. And yet I live in a non-Orthodox area, and I deal in the main with secular Jews. So how do I operate? How do I balance the two worlds? Coercion is the thing of the past. It reminds me of the famous advert which had a cocktail stick with a fishbowl on the top saying, "This is the only thing we'll push down your throat on Shabbos morning." There's no such thing today as coercing people. Religious coercion doesn't work. What works is love and inspiration. And the only way in Chabad we were taught how to deal with this current situation was really given out by the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, in his classic Tanya in chapter 32. Ironically, the works of Chabad are based on Pnimius HaTorah, whose teacher was the Rabbi in Meron. And ironically, it's specifically from there that we have the answer of how to balance these worlds. The Alter Rebbe teaches us in Tanya not to look at the external, not to look at the dress, not to look at the outer veneer, but to peer inside and look at the neshama, at the soul. I once heard that there was a guy with pink hair and a bolt through his nose walked in So one person looked at him askance and says, "Who is this?" As if to say, he's not even Jewish. Another one looked at him and says, he needs kiruv rechoikim. He's distant and he needs bringing close. In Chabad, we were trained to say, a neshama, a soul walked in. Don't look at the pink hair. Don't look at the bolt through his nose. This is a chelek elokami mal mamash. This is a candle of God that has walked in and illuminates and can illuminate and should illuminate. And if it's not illuminating, all it needs is igniting. And those words which the Alter Rebbe uses in Tanya to describe this approach, kulon masimois va'av echad lukulana. In our root, all our souls are one, rooted in the one God. And the Alter Rebbe uses the phrase tzarich lemoshchem bechavlei avosis ava, that when it comes to people who we don't know, we need to draw them with cords and ropes of love. What beautiful words. To schlep a person with Liebschaft, with love. And so I know that although ein deyoseyem shavos, just like people's faces are very different, and so are people's minds very different, and so we encounter people with different religious beliefs, ideologies, philosophies, we should never lose focus of that core identity, that neshama. For me, this is the message that I'm going to take away at this grave moment from the terrible, terrible disaster in Meron. Yes, we may argue in religion and in politics. Argument is okay. It's kosher. We've done it ever since our inception as a people. But we should never lose respect for each other and for each other's dignity. An ideological debate should never turn into personal hatred. Today we've got to look at each other as our enemies look at each other. As Haman famously said, Yeshnoi am echad. There is one nation, mefuzor or mefoirod bein ha'amim, scattered amongst the nations, v'doseihem shones mikolam. And its religion is different than every other religion. Our enemies see us not as Orthodox Jews, Reform Jews, liberal Jews, conservative Jews. Our enemies see us as one Jewish people. Internally, we must also never lose sight of that Jewish soul, national soul. And let us look for what unites us rather than what divides us. Let us never denigrate or put down or deride a person personally. Debate, yes. Argue, yes. But kavod, respect, there has to be that mutual respect. And so, as families grieve and sit shiver and mourn, it is the moment to mourn with them. It is the moment not to seek justifications, not to explain why it happened, not to point fingers and blame, but rather, as Aaron did when his sons passed away, Vayidum Aaron, to be silent. To be silent but reflective. To be silent but to go away from this entire episode strengthened in our humanity, in our offering of honor and dignity to one another, strengthened in the knowledge that our enemies see us as one, and we should see each other as one. strengthen in our Avos Yisrael, in our love for each other, and our Achdus Yisrael, in our unity with each other. The Jewish people has suffered a heart attack. We need to recover. In recovering, we need to strengthen all the limbs, all the bodies, and make it work as one whole unit. Mashiach is called David ben Yishai. Yishai stands from the words Yachad Shivtei Yisrael, together all the tribes of Israel. Yes, different tribes, yes, different paths, yes, different dress, but one in soul, one in nation, and one in our unshakable belief in the Almighty, that although we don't understand what happened, Hashem ultimately will bring us Mashiach Tzidkenu, and then we will get true consolation. For Heikitzu v'rananu sheich ne'afar, we believe that those who repose in the dust and those who died now in Meron will be reunited with their families. May it happen speedily in our days. Amen.